At 16, I learned two truths. In my family, silence was survival, and I was terrible at staying silent. I didn't scream. I didn't rebel. I just asked questions, like, why did Aunt Marlene stop coming around after the will was read? Why? Were there two sets of accounting books in Dad's study? Why did Mom say, we don't talk about that every time someone mentioned the fire on Sycamore Street? They told our neighbors I had an artistic temperament, but at home they started calling me unstable. They moved my bedroom to the basement. I wasn't allowed to sit at the table during dinner with guests. Mom said it was because I made people uncomfortable. I stopped getting invited to family vacations. The excuse was always, it's not the right time. We're doing something low-key. You need rest. They made my world small, then blamed me for how I handled it. And when I confided in my English teacher, just once, just enough to say, something isn't right at home, she called my parents out of concern. That night, I came home to an empty bedroom. No bed. No desk, just a suitcase by the door. Mom handed me a folded paper. Pack. You're going to Lakeview Wellness. You'll get the help you need. I stared at her. What help? She smiled. The kind that makes you quiet. And I realized, hadn't been sent away, I'd been erased. The file came in just after lunch. A new inpatient, severe anxiety, episodes of dissociation, night terrors, violent outbursts triggered by memory recall. Age, 25. Name, Tyler Monroe. I stared at the page, waiting for my pulse to settle. I knew that name. I'd grown up with it. Heard it every time someone said, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" My hand stayed steady. My voice didn't waver when I spoke to the attending. I told her I'd take the case. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. I lied. The last time I saw Tyler, he was 13. He stood at the top of the stairs while I was being led out the front door with two strangers in white coats. He didn't ask where I was going. He didn't speak. He just watched. And now, years later, I was the one being handed his intake papers. His medical records were thin, too thin, as if someone had scrubbed the story clean. Tyler had been admitted 2 days earlier after attacking a mirror in his apartment. He didn't remember doing it, but neighbors heard the screaming. They said he kept shouting a name. They couldn't make out what it was. I had a guess. That afternoon, I walked into the observation room. One-way glass, neutral lighting, standard setup. I saw him before he saw me. Same face, older, fragile now. Skin tight across the jaw, eyes darting without direction. He looked lost. He looked like someone waiting for a ghost, and for the first time in 13 years, I thought, maybe I'm not the only one who was haunted. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself it was the call schedule, the charts, the usual tension of residency. But that wasn't true. The truth was simpler. I wasn't ready to see my mother's eyes on a younger face. Wasn't ready to stand across from my brother and pretend this was a standard case file. This wasn't justice. It was a mirror, and I wasn't sure which of us would crack first. The next morning, I typed the handover request. I wrote the words every resident writes when the wait is too much. Personal history conflict, seeking reassignment. I didn't submit it. Instead, I sat across from Dr. Patel during coffee rounds. She'd been my attending in emergency psych for 2 rotations. She knew what quiet pressure looked like. She looked at me, then at the unsigned form in my hand. You're allowed to walk away, Elise, but ask yourself this first. Are you protecting him or protecting the version of yourself they told you to be? I didn't answer. I didn't have one. Because what if this wasn't about healing him? What if, deep down, I just wanted them to see me? Not as a patient, not as a problem, but as a professional. Someone they couldn't ignore, couldn't erase, couldn't silence with one phone call. That wasn't justice. That was ego. And ego doesn't belong in treatment. But something else did. Accountability. By the end of the day, I reopened Tyler's file. I cleared my schedule for the next 72 hours, and I walked back into that clinic knowing one thing for certain: I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for truth, and maybe that was more dangerous. The house was still standing. Barely. It hadn't been sold, just left to rot. Boarded windows, yellowed mailbox, a patch of dead grass where the rose bushes used to be. I parked across the street and waited. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Closure, maybe, or evidence that I hadn't imagined it all. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. Inside, the wallpaper had peeled. Mold clung to the corners. The kitchen reeked of dust and old gas lines. But the staircase, it looked exactly the same. Third step from the top still creaked. The hallway still smelled faintly of lemon polish and control. I went to my old room. They'd stripped it bare, but I remembered the floorboard by the window, the one that shifted when you stepped just right. I pulled it up, expecting nothing. Instead, I found a small tin box. Inside, a folded photo, a note in fading ink, and a child's drawing. Mine. The photo was of me at 16, arms crossed, standing beside Mrs. Rivera, our old neighbor. The woman who used to bring me books, who once said, "You don't imagine the truth. You see it before others do." The note was hers. It read, "I saw what they did. You weren't sick. They were scared of you. One day, you'll come back. And when you do, don't knock. Take your place." I sat there on the floor with the letter in my lap and realized she'd believed me. Someone had believed me. And suddenly, I wasn't in that room to remember what I lost. I was there to reclaim who I'd always been. I walked into the hospital the next morning, feeling the weight of the letter in my coat pocket. It was strange how something as small as a folded piece of paper could make you taller. Tyler was scheduled for his first real session. I asked the nurse to bring him into the consultation room. I waited, notebook in hand, breathing in the antiseptic calm. When the door opened, he looked older than I remembered, but not by much. There was a rawness to him, a kind of unfinished grief you only see in people who grew up believing pain was private. He didn't recognize me. Not at first, but when I introduced myself. "Dr. Monroe." He blinked, a flicker of confusion. I saw his jaw tighten, the way it did when he was a child and didn't want to cry. He sat down, eyes darting everywhere but my face. I ran through the standard questions: sleep, appetite, memory, nightmares. Each answer was clipped, cautious, as if he was afraid of giving something away. Halfway through, he finally looked up. "Have we met before?" I paused, the old instinct to lie rising up, but I pushed it down. "We grew up in the same town," I said. He nodded, but his hands kept moving, nervous, searching, like he was feeling for a door in the dark. The session ended with more silence than words, but I knew something had shifted. For the first time, I saw not just my brother, but the scars the family left on both of us. And for the first time in years, I was the one holding the pen. I started digging. Not into Tyler, but around him. His medical file was thinner than it should have been. 2 hospitalizations, both undocumented beyond vague notes. Stress-related episode. Monitor for delusions. No diagnostics, no long-term plans, just a trail of exits and silence. I filed a formal request for his prior therapy materials. It came with resistance. Then, 2 days later, a sealed manila envelope arrived at my desk. Inside, 5 compact discs labeled in fading marker, Tyler Monroe, Sessions 1 to 5. I stayed late that night and played the first one. The audio was grainy. The voice on the tape was barely teenage, restless, defensive. What if I saw something I wasn't supposed? 2, Tyler said. The therapist asked, "Like what?" Tyler paused, then whispered, "She didn't scream. She just looked at Mom. And then they took her." My stomach tightened. I skipped to the next tape. Tyler. "They said she had to go because she was dangerous, but she wasn't. I think she just knew too much." By the 3rd session, his voice cracked in places. He talked about nightmares, doors slamming, a woman's voice saying, "Make her disappear." He never said my name. But he didn't have to. I sat in that dark office, listening to a child who'd buried a truth because the adults in his life made lies feel safer. Tyler had been protecting the family story, the same way I'd tried to rewrite mine into something survivable. And now, years later, both versions were unraveling. On record. On tape. For the first time, I had more than memory. I had evidence. The family session was set for Thursday. It wasn't mandatory, but the clinic strongly encouraged participation. Cynthia RSVP'd within the hour. So did Robert. I wasn't surprised. They loved controlled performances, especially the ones where they could pretend to be victims of circumstance. I cleared my calendar that day, not just for Tyler, for myself. I knew what I wanted to say. I just didn't know what I needed to hear. The night before, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, longer than usual, hair up, no jewelry, minimal makeup, nothing performative, just presence, just precision. I wore navy, not black, not mourning, not memory, something sharp, quietly formal, like a verdict. Before I left my apartment, I slipped Mrs. Rivera's letter into my bag. Not because I needed it, but because I owed her presence in the room. She saw me when no one else did. She wrote the truth when I was too young to name it. At the hospital, I reviewed Tyler's updated treatment plan. I rehearsed the session in my head, how I'd open, how I'd manage redirection, what I'd do if someone cried or shouted or denied. I reminded myself this wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. Tyler needed the truth, even if it came from the person his family tried to erase. And maybe, in some quiet way, I needed it too. Not to heal, not to make peace, but to be seen, fully, professionally, and without apology, and I'd earned that moment, not through rage, through return. They arrived late, Cynthia in a beige coat, Robert in navy, neutral, respectable, deliberate. The kind of colors people wear when they want to look blameless. Tyler was already seated, shoulders stiff, fingers tapping the hem of his sleeve. I stood to greet them. They nodded, polite. No recognition, just the vague air of parents used to. Being admired, I offered them water. They declined. I asked if they were ready to begin. Cynthia smiled and said, "Of course, we want what's best for our son." I sat across from them, opened the file, and began as I would with any case. Tyler is responding to environmental cues, triggers linked to memory, specifically suppressed trauma. His symptoms are consistent with dissociative episodes rooted in early adolescent events. Cynthia tilted her head. Such as? I looked directly at her. Such as watching a sibling being institutionalized for the convenience of the household, without cause, without diagnosis, just removal. There was a silence. Then a flicker. Cynthia's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed. Robert shifted in his chair. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you saying our son's condition is our fault?" I closed the file. "I'm saying trauma doesn't just happen in war zones. It happens in dining rooms, in family rooms, in houses that teach silence more than safety." Tyler's hands stopped moving. He whispered, "You were the one, the girl from the stairs." I met his gaze. "My name," I said clearly, "is Dr. Elise Monroe." Cynthia's face didn't break, but her knuckles turned white around the armrest. "I knew you looked familiar," she said, soft as a snake. Robert's lips parted, but no words came. Tyler blinked fast, like his mind was catching up to his memory. "I saw them take you. I heard Mom say you were dangerous." Cynthia cut in. "That was years ago. She was unwell. We did what we had to do." I kept my voice steady. "No, what you did was label truth as instability. You turned questions into symptoms. And then you buried me." Robert stood. "We're leaving." But Tyler didn't move. "I remember everything now," he said. "You didn't scream. You just looked back. You were calm." Cynthia stood too. Her voice dropped. She was a disturbed child. I stood last. "No, I was a mirror, and you didn't like what you saw." They left without another word. The door clicked shut. The room held its breath. Tyler leaned forward. You really became a doctor. I nodded. He exhaled like it hurt. I think they're afraid of you now. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just gathered my notes and replied softly, Good. The day after the session, I filed a transfer request for Tyler. It wasn't personal. It was protocol. Treating someone so deeply tied to your own history isn't just unethical. It's dangerous. Not for them, for you. The clinic director approved it in under an hour. No questions. Just a nod of respect and a quiet, you did what many wouldn't. Before I let go of the case entirely, I submitted an internal memorandum. I attached transcripts from the tapes, notes from Tyler's sessions, and a supplemental file labeled Family Influence, Suppression of Symptoms. I didn't embellish, I didn't accuse, I just recorded what was real. What had been real for years, hidden behind polite family smiles and incomplete paperwork. That afternoon, I accessed the archived patient database. My name wasn't there. No file, no notes, no record of admission. Legally, I'd never been institutionalized. But I remembered the walls, the way they hummed at night, the weight of the locked door, and the silence that followed me after. I requested a search by insurance billing. That's where I found it. A shadow file under an alias. A physician's signature I didn't recognize. Diagnosis: acute adolescent psychosis, behaviorally disruptive. I was 15. There was no therapy, no medication, just observation, just silence. I printed it out and held it in my hands. Thin paper, heavy truth. It wasn't justice, not yet, but it was proof. For so long, I thought my story was too quiet to matter. But quiet things leave marks. You just have to know where to look. The story wasn't supposed to spread. But someone on the clinic board leaked the memo. Maybe it was the phrasing. Maybe it was the tape transcripts. Maybe it was the fact that I signed my full name, for the first time in years, without flinching. 2 weeks later, a small wellness blog picked it up, then a mental health rights forum, then a journalist called, asking for a quote. I declined. The story didn't need my voice anymore. The truth was out there, in plain sight. Cynthia sent a cease and desist. She claimed defamation, emotional distress, and a sustained campaign of public humiliation. I forwarded it to legal and went back to work. I didn't have to defend myself. I had the file. I had the billing record. I had the tapes. Tyler sent me a short email. 1 line. They're pretending none of it happened. I replied with just 2 words. Of course. The hospital issued a formal review of the Monroe case history. The original diagnosing psychiatrist surrendered his license. An ethics panel opened. Quietly. Off the record, but not off the books. Dr. Patel found me in the hallway one evening and said, "Do you know how rare this is? For someone to come back and expose it from the inside?" I said, "I didn't come back to expose it. I came back to understand it. The exposure was just collateral." That night, I walked home alone. No music, no distractions, just the sound of my own footsteps, solid and certain. For the first time, the world was speaking my name, and this time, I wasn't flinching. The invitation came in a cream envelope. Heavy paper, embossed seal, a national symposium on adolescent psychiatric ethics. Panel title, Misdiagnosis, Power, and the Cost of Silence. They wanted me to speak. I almost said no. I wasn't a speaker. I didn't want applause. But then I thought about how many voices never get that stage, and how many girls were still being told they were too emotional, too dramatic, too much. So I said yes. The auditorium was modest, intimate, rows of thoughtful faces, notebooks ready, no lights, no performance, just truth. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't name my family. I didn't need to. I told the shape of the story, the way it folded in on itself, the way a label becomes a cage. How easily that cage gets passed off as help. Somewhere in the middle, I looked up and saw Tyler at the back of the room, standing, not hiding. He met my eyes and didn't look away. After the session, he waited until the room cleared, then walked. up and said, I talked to them. I told them I'm done pretending they were good people. I nodded. That was his story to tell now. Then he said, they didn't just make you the problem. They made you the diagnosis. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. He already understood. That night, I walked past the clinic lobby. My name was etched in the glass donor wall. Just 4 words. Dr. Elise Monroe, Psychiatry. For once, I didn't feel erased. I felt placed. The invitation came in a cream envelope. Heavy paper, embossed seal, a national symposium on adolescent psychiatric ethics. Panel title, Misdiagnosis, Power, and the Cost of Silence. They wanted me to speak. I almost said no, I wasn't a speaker. I didn't want applause. But then I thought about how many voices never get that stage, and how many girls were still being told they were too emotional, too dramatic, too much. So I said yes. The auditorium was modest, intimate, rows of thoughtful faces, notebooks ready, no lights, no performance, just truth. Didn't tell them everything. I didn't name my family. I didn't need to. I told the shape of the story, the way it folded in on itself, the way a label becomes a cage, how easily that cage gets passed off as help. Somewhere in the middle, I looked up and saw Tyler at the back of the room, standing, not hiding. He met my eyes and didn't look away. After the session, he waited until the room cleared, then walked up and said, I talked to them. I told them I'm done pretending they were good people. I nodded. That was his story to tell now. Then he said, they didn't just make you the problem. They made you the diagnosis. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. He already understood. That night, I walked past the clinic lobby. My name was etched in the glass donor wall. Just 4 words. Dr. Elise Monroe, Psychiatry. For once, I didn't feel erased. I felt placed. I didn't plan to go back to the house. It had already been sold. A new family lived there now. They'd painted the shutters, reseeded the lawn, hung a wind chime by the porch, but I drove by anyway, parked across the street, sat with the engine off and the letter in my lap. Mrs. Rivera's. Handwriting was still clear, though the edges had faded. You weren't sick. They were scared of you. One day you'll come back. And I had. Not with shouting, not with rage, but with records, with proof, with a name they couldn't erase this time. I stepped out of the car and walked to the porch. A child's drawing was taped to the front window. The new owner opened the door, curious but kind. I introduced myself, said I once lived here. She nodded, said quietly, You're not the first to come back. I didn't stay long. I didn't ask to go inside. I just took the letter, slid it into the mailbox, and said, This belongs here more than I do. Back in the car, I sat with the silence, not the kind I used to fear. This one felt earned. They had called me unstable, labeled me, locked me away, rewrote my story without asking if I had one. But I did. And I lived it out loud, in lecture halls, in case files, in glass-etched panels and whispered sessions. I wasn't their shame anymore. I was my own record, and if the past ever came, knocking again, I had something better than anger. I had the truth, and I knew how to file it properly.